Well, I'm so pleased today to bring my friend Micahel Kanaan on for a segment of A Veteran's Voice. Micahel has just come out with a new book, T-AI, and this is a huge week for you, Micahel. So I just want to acknowledge that, and I'm excited for you, and thank you for making time to join us for this segment on A Veteran's Voice.
Shauna, I can think of no better place that I would want to be right now. And thanks for your determination and focus on sharing these conversations. I mean, think about it. Why else do we have verbal and written language and we interact with one another than to let it go to waste on the hard topics? And that's what you embody. So I appreciate being here.
You are an AI expert with a humanist bent, which I really appreciate. And I honor your expertise as well. Let's start with maybe some background on your military service. Anything you want to share with us?
I think the thing I think about most about my military service is that I grew up without knowing anyone in the military. I'm reminded often that only about 1% of this country have served. And there are plenty of communities and areas where we just don't always have that experience. Yet we say, thank you for your service and all the rest of the pieces. And I always ask, what do those words mean? So growing up without having exposure to that, I went to the Air Force Academy, and that was largely based on having an opportunity and being in a family and around people who always said, you can't always reopen doors in life. So if you have the opportunity to walk through one, you never want to say, what if? And that was where I find myself today. And I could not be more grateful to the people and to the opportunities of seeing the world and everything else that it's exposed to me.
Awesome. And now, having served in the Air Force, how do the words thank you for your service hit you now?
My most often response to that is something to the effect of, it's my pleasure. And I think that reminds other people that it's not necessarily a burden. It's not necessarily that you can't understand it. I think people often forget that any job in the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense, we'll say, Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, there's probably a job that's much like the job you do in everyday life. What I'm most passionate about is bridging gaps in that communication and making sure that we speak a common language. And there is more that is similar about us than is different.
Mm-hmm. During your time in the Air Force, you were quickly selected and elevated to a position of leadership at the Pentagon. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and service in that capacity?
It's all about the people that you're surrounded by. And if there's anything that I learned in my time at the Pentagon, is that the best leadership, private or public service alike, takes its cues from the needs of its ranks. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, democracy takes its direction from the voice of its people. And I think that's important to remind ourselves of, particularly right here, right now in 2020. And I was fortunate to be surrounded by people who embodied the concept of teaming the techniques of the old with the ideas of the new. Mm-hmm. And that's what brought teams together, that helped us create common sets of experiences. Mm-hmm. And that helped us build communities that could see these new ideas into existence, like artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. And you're right now working with researchers and professionals at MIT. Can you talk a little bit about where your career has taken you since your time at the Pentagon?
I'm so excited about the partnership that we have at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with what we'll deem as main campus, and then Lincoln Laboratory, which is a traditional government entity working with the government very hand in hand and very closely. If we look back throughout our past, the triangular relationship between government, academia, and industry, it did things like make the internet. I mean, what a profound thing. And perhaps over the past 30 or 40 years, we may have moved away from one another while we let people move down their path and commercial do its thing and academia do its thing. But now we stand at a new inflection point with these new technologies that impact us all, that we can all understand. So the most exciting piece about this partnership is what we do here is develop AI for a public good that serves both the Department of Defense and it serves every one of our citizens. So if we can use this as the platform to do that and to create experiences together, to remind ourselves we're more alike than we are different, that's what it's all about. And that's what this partnership is all about here today.
You know, I think that a lot of Americans think of Lincoln Labs and AI as a bit like Area 51. Could you share maybe whatever you can as an example of how you're using technology in ways that benefit us in practical ways?
I'm so excited about this. So let's think about this idea of scheduling. Whether you work at a grocery store, at a hospital, or whether you're scheduling pilots on a flight line for training or for missions, it's scheduling at its core, right?
Right.
That's all it's about. It's about optimizing the best way to put teams together and to ensure that the mission or our job in the private sector is being accomplished. So we have a very public partnership on doing C-17 scheduling. So that's with Air Mobility Command, where we have an optimization algorithm that helps take into account hundreds of parameters for how we do scheduling. But then more interestingly, to inspire the machine learning and AI community, we also have a public challenge right now that was just issued in August, where we use magnetic navigation from the Earth's magnetosphere in order to use GPS if and when the day comes that GPS didn't exist. And by the way, we all use GPS every day for Waze, but also in some really interesting, ways, pun intended.
Yeah.
Because even your ATM would not work without GPS. Your bank information, the way we trade on the stock market, so many aspects of our lives. So if and when the day came that didn't exist, and there are a lot of reasons that could happen, we can still make sure we move forward together. So those are just two examples of meaningful ways we interact with our citizenry.
You and I have also had conversations about the misuse of artificial intelligence or the misapplication of it to things that maybe you would say as an AI expert, it wasn't really best designed to address. And one of the areas that we've talked about is about using AI for sort of suicide prevention, predictive ability, and just wanted to get your thoughts on that and hear what you have to say on that topic, because we both hear it all the time. Let's develop some kind of gizmo that does this thing that allows us to have this bird's eye view on who is going to be at risk for suicide. Love to hear your thoughts.
I'm going to sum it up in 3 words. Stop the train. There is too much techno-solutionism going on. And when I say that, I mean that we run into a problem and then we say, well, surely the most advanced technology in the world will help us to address that problem. Here's how AI works, and very simply. Once upon a time, when we worked with the machines that are in front of us right now, the Zoom calls we had to explicitly code the inputs and generally kind of understand the outputs from there, right?
Right.
The thing about machine learning is that we've been able to digitize our mathematics, algorithms, the code, things that can change over time, much like, Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now we can use our code in our machines to automatically create weights and change those variables. Simply put, the difference now in 2020 is that we're capable of allowing machines without explicit direction to discover insights and patterns from the data we memorialize in our lives every single day. Every interaction is memorialized. So when you put machine learning into practice, what it really is like is kind of looking in the mirror, except at a grandiose scale. Because for us, data exists. And for a machine, since we've memorialized the data, it's like experience for the machine. So here's my concern. If we just use artificial intelligence to say, well, I bet that could predict suicidal ideations, there are two issues that arise. Number one, for whom? Who are we talking about here? A certain demographic? Did you go back and collect all of the data from what is ultimately the most unique, human-centric, anomalous experience that there could absolutely be, right? And how are we going to get data that's representative of everyone? That's number one. And number two, if we could, and all of a sudden we told everyone, well, we're going to get data from everyone because this is a problem that we have, so we want to be able to predict it. Are we actually doing more secondary and tertiary damage by saying, go interact outside of the system, get away from community, right? Because then you're concerned about being collected upon. So you have a slippery slope argument.
Right.
That's not to say that technology is not beneficial. There are plenty of ways when we bring, and you and I have talked about this before, bringing anonymous in-home healthcare and telehealth that you don't have to walk through the door so someone sees your face doing that at the Family Readiness Center. We could bring that into the home. There are a number of platforms and technologies that have great communities, Twitch, Animal Crossing. How can we use these platforms to better connect people and to go through trauma and to experience it together and to help with one another? So there is a place for technology, but if we don't understand the technology and we just wield the words AI without really understanding what it's all about, I fear mistakes in the future.
Yeah, so you're talking really about using technology in the right ways and not having the tail wag the dog, so to speak. Tell me about your book. I want to know, like how it feels to have this come out. Tell us about what you wrote about, anything you want to share. I'd like to dive into this a little bit too.
It's been an interesting week, and I know it's one you experience as being an author and a prolific one at that. I think I mentioned to you, at about 72 hours out, we're talking about a human experience.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, wow, these are your words. This is who you are out to the entire world, right? With your name. And it makes you feel vulnerable in a way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You think to yourself, I hope a book is like this. A book's like a boat, especially in nonfiction writing. I hope I built a boat that doesn't have holes. And until it comes out to the world, you have no idea the holes that what might be there and the water you're taking on.
Yeah.
And then once it comes out, you're like, well, it's time to row the boat. It's time to do that. Yeah. I will say that, it feels surreal, but I can say it's having friends who are authors like yourself and other people who went through similar experiences that help guide you along the way and to talk about what they learned and the moments that they had after what is truly writing a book is an interestingly lonely experience in its own right.
Yeah.
And it's certainly a team sport. You need people around you. Anyone who thinks, you sat in a basement and wrote a book, by yourself without support, that's not true, right?
Yeah, it's not the book
sport.
you want to read anyway.
And it's definitely not the book you want to read. We can get very meta. We can get very meta on the biases of your own writing. And I think that's the coolest experience is that you learn about those biases. Yeah. And it's ultimately a team sport. And just like with anything in life, it's who you surround yourself with. So it's exciting, also distressing.
Yeah, totally. I can totally identify with your analogy, and fiction does give you cover.
A little bit.
A little bit more. If you're doing a nonfiction book and you're standing behind it, it is a vulnerable experience. But I know you, and I know that you've done your research, and you've had those people in your life that have challenged you all the way through in those conversations. So this is going to be great. Tell us what T-minus AI is essentially about and why people should buy a copy and read your work.
Think about the way AI has infiltrated our lives. It's the reason your 401k does what it does. It's mostly the suggestions of music you get. It's pretty much the news you get, by the way, right? This is the reason. It's the ads you see. It creates, I believe in my mind that the whole world talks about artificial intelligence because my algorithms like that, right? When not necessarily everyone does. It creates art. It creates what we deem as fake news nowadays, computer-generated content. And you know what? For millennials, hashtag adults under 40 out there in the world, it's, you can blame early machine learning applications for the perpetuation of the stock market crash, right? So it's a part of our lives every single day. And what I ask, and by the way, even in baseball, so as a baseball fan, I think, it's in some ways ruined the entire game. That's up for debate, I understand. That's America's pastime. So it affects all these things that we deal with every single day. Yet the question is most of the time we place it on a pedestal. It's like we throw the kitchen sink, not the kitchen sink, the kitchen and the living room out the window, and then we all of a sudden can't just discuss it. We can't talk about it, and we start to lose our frameworks. We start to lose our sense of self because of those words, artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. So despite everything at risk and all the conversations, it just remains shrouded behind this cloud of mystery and misunderstanding and hidden behind complex technical terms. They're confused even further by our extravagant depictions in science fiction.
Yeah.
The realities and its profound implications to each of our lives, they seem tough to decipher, but they're crucial to understand. So in the book, what I do is I explain realities of AI from a human-oriented perspective that's easy to comprehend through our collective history of innovation and technology, because the topic is truly a multidisciplinary one. You have to know a little bit about our own evolution, the development of language, the scales of numbers, both big and small, how computers work, of course, at a basic level, some of our own history, and also a little bit of how your brain works, right? And once we have that, then let's move to the discussion of what is it? What does it mean to say AI? What is a neural network? And the reason for that is it generally starts at that point, but we don't have any context. So it's the same circular conversation where I had mentioned we speak above, pass below, and through one another. And then once we lay that out and we can say, I can a little bit understand how in ones and zeros, we roughly depict the neuron in our brain. Okay, I gotcha. And my book helps you understand how we got to this place. Then let's talk about the big stuff. Yeah. The way that it can influence our lives, the global implications, and the cultural and national vulnerabilities and personal ones already exposed, and the pressing issues squarely on the table right now. But without, the aspects of this tripod or this chair we can sit on, all three of those, the conversation seems to be meaningless. And what I wanted to do is really tap into the books that inspired me, the books that talked about the human experience, because we as humans, and in your work, we learn best through connection and storytelling. And what I want to do is write a book about artificial intelligence that was human-centric, all about storytelling of us.
Amazing. And it takes such a long time to bring a book forward. And what's incredible about this is just how well timed it is with everything that we're facing right now in terms of, how do we recreate a world where we connect more deeply, more fully in the midst of a global pandemic that divides and conquers, that isolates us into our own private foxholes.
I really think about that often because the way that AI is used, we talk about the digital divide in this country. We talk about loneliness, which is perpetuated most often by not having access to others. These are real problems.
Yes.
And if we're not all on these systems, if we're not being represented in those memorialized actions of data, then surely we see this play out poorly, which is hire more old white people with money for our boardrooms, which is not represent the people most affected by courtroom decisions and sentencing actions. What I want to inspire is a lot of people to be involved in the conversation so that as we move forward, they know it when they see it, at least to that degree. We know not to stick a fork in an electrical outlet and no tinfoil in that microwave, just a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And to also make sure that the people who need to be represented most are when we put these technologies into action.
Yeah, well, you're the perfect source for that wisdom and that message. And I'm so glad you wrote this. I would have probably read a lot of it if it hadn't come late last night, because this is your launch week. So I look forward to reading it, Michael, and I'm grateful to you for coming on and sharing with us today. Thank you.
Shauna, grateful for you and your friendship. And I'm sure we'll talk, probably this week after this. But thanks for having me on.